So welcome everybody. Sorry, we had some small little inconvenience, and I am speaking on behalf of the C20, that is the engagement group that gathers the civil society from all over the world in this demanding dialogue with the G20. And in this C20 Summit, we are very happy to host this meeting organized by Pangea Foundation on the situation in Afghanistan, or some question that are arising from the Afghani experience and future. And the C20 normally works on the agenda of the G20 with some, how can I say, priorities, or to put together our work. The first one is that we want to, we consider the G20 a very relevant group of actors, but a group of actors that has not the legitimation that has United Nations. So our fundamental call to the G20 is to be at the service of multilateral frameworks, at the service of United Nations. And we say always that all our consideration on the agenda of the G20 are seen and raised under the lens of human rights. So normally that means that we don't deal with international politics. We deal with the 2030 agenda on sustainable development. We deal on the internal responsibility, domestic responsibility of the G20 member, and on the consequences of the actions of the G20 members. But in this case, in this very case, this year we saw how fast has been the evolution in Afghanistan, and how critical the dimension of human rights is in Afghanistan, but not only in Afghanistan, also in other spaces in the planet, in other conflicts in the planet. That's the reason why, even if we, if this is not normally part of the G20 agenda and of the C20 agenda, we almost asked Pangea to help us in having in the big picture of our C20 Summit. Probably you've seen how many meetings we will have almost together in these 3 days, 4 days, if we include the day dedicated to Italy on the 8th of October, to organize a meeting speaking of Afghanistan. And it was important for me, speaking on behalf of all the C20 constituency, to say at the beginning how happy we are to have this meeting today, to thank Pangea and all the panelists and all the people who helped in organizing this meeting, and to welcome you in this C20 Summit. This is a relevant point, the call on human rights and the call on facing conflicts in a non-violent way is a permanent call, and it is practically the reason of life of civil society. So thank you to help us in making another step in this path together. Simona, over to you.
So first of all, thanks to Riccardo Moro, the C20 Sherpa, to have done this great introduction. Thanks to underline the human rights issue and the peace and no conflict issue that is really important for civil society action. And thanks to the speakers that are here today, all women. I would like to underline this. This is very important for us. Fondazione Pangea is an Italian organization working as an NGO in Afghanistan from 2003, and we have the privilege to even work before, from 23 years that we are working with Afghan organization and Afghan people to support the situation in Afghanistan, and it was one of the reasons for the born of Fondazione Pangea. So we know how much is difficult now the situation. We know that we crossed 40 years of war, and still there are no real vision on how much time we will take over this war. And there are many difficulties like chronic poverty, food insecurity, and actually it's 3 years that there are natural disasters like droughts, and finally COVID-19 that continue to be kind of factors, negative factors that are working on the population. And finally, at the end of this summer, arrived the Taliban regime. And, it's quite difficult to see how these long stories will end, And yeah, we have a lot of IDPs in Afghanistan, a lot of people trying to going out. There is a new humanitarian crisis going on. So what's the real future for Afghanistan? Do we just need millions of dollars to solve the situation in Afghanistan? I don't think so. It's just for this reason that we, today we are here speaking with Lisa Piper. Lisa Piper is from Akbar. She's the director of Akbar, that is the agency coordinating body for Afghan relief and development. So it's quite, I know Akbar. I was when I was in Afghanistan, I was just coordinating with Akbar because it's really important to have a network of NGO from national and international level that are coordinating. And it's really important to have this kind of body that are working under values like neutrality, independence, impartiality, and humanity. So, Lisa, today I would like to just ask you what's going on with this humanitarian crisis and what Afghanistan needs, because in very few days there will be a specific G20 for Afghanistan. So what we should underline for the policy and the politician, but particularly what Afghanistan really needs to come over this humanitarian crisis in this moment. Thank you.
Simona, just one word. I have to reach another meeting, another parallel meeting to make some greetings over there, but I will be back soon because I want to share all the rest of this meeting with you. So sorry I apologize to get out for a while, but I'll be back. Thank you.
Thank you. Please, Lisa, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you for the invitation to speak today. And hello from Kabul to everyone. I suppose a top line to directly answer your questions, and then I'll get into more details, is what we need is NGOs in addition to the funding, because we know needs have been increasing, but NGOs and wider civil society must have unfettered access to the people who are in need. We are working in times of great uncertainty. There is a lack of clarity about how we work. And we know that the population has great needs, women and girls have needs, and it is really important that there be an equitable and safe humanitarian response. And in order to do that, there must be female aid workers so that we can have access to women and girls in Afghanistan and reach everyone with those needs. We are also dealing with a huge crisis when it comes to access to cash. With the freezing of the assets, there is very limited cash in country. We are facing limits on access to cash. This greatly impedes any humanitarian response. And so there is a need for an international solution. No matter what happens in country, we still have the international layer of the restrictions. And so there is a need for a bridge, for an exception, for a humanitarian response so that everyone can get to work. So those are some top layer needs. And above all, I think the biggest need is that the situation cannot be allowed so that we are in a place where the international community does not have communication with the authorities here in Afghanistan. That communication must continue. It cannot be allowed that the authorities here shut down communication because the people of Afghanistan are in their hour of need now. So that would be a plea of mine on behalf of the NGO community, is that must continue, that communication. There must be a way to resolve some of these challenges on an international level. So those would be my top layer bullets in response to those questions. As we know, ACBAR members, we have 167 national and international NGO members, which provide crucial assistance to millions of people across the different sectors and in all provinces of Afghanistan. The NGO community is committed to staying and delivering a principled humanitarian response in Afghanistan, despite the uncertainty and the insecurity that we are facing throughout the country, or potential insecurity. We are seeing compounds and assets seized, and we are working in an environment where it is unclear what that operational environment is. So I would like to perhaps talk a bit personally as well. So this is my third time in Afghanistan. And so I've been lucky to spend a total of 9 years over the course of 17 years. And so during this time, I've learned from communities here about kindness and generosity and a hospitality towards others that I haven't witnessed or experienced anywhere but here. I've spent many days and nights in rural communities, seeing children go to school, having better access to healthcare, and dreaming about their futures, both boys and girls. Many of those children at the time wanted to be doctors and engineers, but also teachers. This was a common response whenever I would ask them what they wanted to be. Those children that I met many years ago are now grown, and they most likely have children of their own. And they will want their children to also be able to plan and work towards realizing their future dreams. But this won't be possible if humanitarian needs are allowed to only grow. If unmet, they will spiral to a point where there is limited to no space for any development interventions. If we look at NGOs and wider civil society, we're often talked about as a third sector. In Afghanistan, there are more than 2,000 registered NGOs with the Ministry of Economy, and there are thousands more registered civil society organizations with the Ministry of Justice. And for decades, we have served a key role in delivering basic essential services such as primary education, health, water and sanitation, providing shelter, counseling, and support services to those in need. This is needed now more than ever. But to us, in order to be able to do this. This means that we are independently able to assess need and deliver assistance to those identified as most at risk of food insecurity, malnutrition, poverty, illness, and in need of vital health, education, protection, shelter, food, and nutrition services. This means that every humanitarian aid worker, women and men, must be part of any humanitarian response in Afghanistan. Without women working in their full capacity and taking into consideration cultural requirements, it won't be possible to reach those women and girls in need of life-saving assistance. We are also facing counterterrorism measures, freezing of assets in the central bank, and a subsequent looming collapse of the banking system in Afghanistan. This makes it extremely difficult for NGOs to access funds and provide life-saving humanitarian assistance to communities when they are most at need. Because of this extremely restrictive environment, we do require additional support from international donors and the diplomatic community through increased long-term flexible funding that is safeguarded from sanctions, counterterrorism, and any other potentially restrictive measures that would impede a principled humanitarian action. I would like to highlight that national NGOs in particular face additional challenges because of the freezing of the assets. Their funds are here in Afghanistan, and they are not currently able to access them. This is because of limits placed by authorities here in access to those accounts. And this is because of the overall levels of cash in country. But we know national NGOs are the backbone of any humanitarian response. They're often the frontline workers, but yet they're not able to pay basic operational costs and staff salaries, let alone implement a humanitarian response. National NGOs have also really been hard hit by participating in the national programs such as Sehat Mandi, Easy Car, Citizens Charter. They have been unpaid for months, and they are facing safety and security risks, a reduced footprint, if not closure. And so there is a need for the international community to help resolve this issue so that NGOs can get paid for the work they have already done to contribute to Afghanistan so that they do not close. In addition to this role, the role of civil society organizations goes much deeper, particularly in Afghanistan. We have had a role and a responsibility in demanding to authorities for more efficient public services, monitoring the performance of the government and other stakeholders in the provision of services, holding them accountable for their work, advocating for human rights and for needs and priorities, particularly for those who are marginalized groups, contributing to peaceful conflict mediation and resolution. It is more critical than ever that civil society, NGOs and wider civil society be able to continue this role in this period of uncertainty and whatever is to come. So I would conclude that in addition to the planned scale up, the planned pledging, the increase in funding, that funding must be flexible and in the context of an economic crisis, an imminent breakdown of the provision of essential services. On behalf of the NGO community, we would ask for the international community that it leverage diplomatic influence to ensure compliance with international law and respect for humanitarian space by all actors. This means access for the equitable participation of men and women in NGO humanitarian operations to support all Afghans requiring life-saving and sustaining relief at this critical juncture in time. We also ask that there are clear exemptions for humanitarian actors and humanitarian supplies from sanctions, both now as well as the future. And these exemptions must be put in place immediately and not in the weeks or months ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. You was great to hear you and to underline the humanitarian role of the civil society that could not be at the same level of all the other things that are going on. And it's really, really, really urgent, because we saw the images of people looking for food in the street and just harassing each other, trying to take a piece of bread. And this is just in the main cities, so we can understand what's going on in the other area. So it's not possible, because it's 40 years of war. It's enough. And we really need to see another kind of future, to perceive another kind of future for all the people of Afghanistan, but also for all the people of the world, because we are tired about this kind of situation all over the world. And Afghanistan is just one of the most symbolic countries where these things happen. And first of all, let me introduce Dr. Orzala Nemat. She is an associate researcher associated to the SOAS UK universities. And today with her, we will speak about migration and the new wave of migration. Because, you know, the wave of migration from Afghanistan never stopped, we can say like this. But what I didn't know that around 5.3 million of people were returnees from 2002 up to now. And now, of course, the trend has stopped again. Now we go back again away. But one of the things that people never know is just that Afghan go back. Afghan go back home. And because they want to build a new country. And, you know, we as European country, we always are afraid and build wall just to stop migration. And the new migration wave is coming from Afghanistan. Mainly, we can say, are men, because, of course, women have no these facilities to cross the border, cross the frontier. And for this reason, I think that we need more humanitarian evacuation to help also women that in these 20 years of, we can say, of these last 20 years, have contributed to build a new Afghanistan. Anyway, the question is quite huge about migration. We know that there are a lot of internal IDPs. Last number that I saw is 3.5 million people that are internally displaced. So please, Dr. Orzala Nemat, can you please just give us a broader picture and what's going on, also facing, also we as Western country, what we have to wait, and now we have to host the new wave of migration from Afghanistan.
Thank you very much, Simona. And I would like to take the opportunity to first start with thanking the C20 for providing this platform, and also for my very dear friends at Pangea, Simona Lanzoni. Our history goes back to 2 years now, to 23 years, as you were saying, of your commitment to work in Afghanistan and Pangea as an organization and individually supporting the cause of Afghanistan, providing help and assistance to the most deprived or most vulnerable parts of the society, like urban poor. I really appreciate your work and your commitment on behalf of my people in Afghanistan. Definitely the questions around migration are one that requires very depth sort of understanding and also analysis, if I can say. Very briefly, just before going to that, I'd like to sort of have a very quick point regarding generally talking about some quick reflection on the civil society in Afghanistan. I'm very, very pleased, and I fully support Ms. Piper's remarks and wholeheartedly in terms of, the need and the dire need for humanitarian assistance and all that. For those of your audiences who have probably less clarity about what is civil society in Afghanistan, how it came to exist, and how it became one of the most vibrant civil societies, confidently in the region, but probably even globally. Because I remember times of going to New York and meeting some officials, UN officials, let alone the politicians of governments and all that, and introducing myself as a civil society member. And they were like, who are you? Are you with the government? No. Oh, are you with the Taliban? No, at that time, Taliban were opposition. So, you're working with the opposition of the government? No, we are the civil society. So who are you representing? That was the dilemma of the some of the UN officials, let alone the others. So in Afghanistan, and because we are in the platform of G20, I was just out of curiosity going through the pictures of who are the G20s, who are the heads. And as it happens, most of them men are the global leaders. And these global leaders are definitely paying a huge stake, a huge responsibility, one way or another, towards the people of Afghanistan. I'm not talking about the governments. We have to deal with our governments when we have a proper representative government one day and bring those in court who have put us through this nationally. But because Afghanistan has been subject of international and global intervention for the last 40 years, because of the fact that we fought the wars of the world, I think the responsibility is naturally coming to these countries, to G20s. There is a moral responsibility to take actions and to avoid a catastrophe that is probably ahead of us. And this is something that is literally in our hands to change it one way or another. And that will not be something to be forgiven in future. So the civil society in Afghanistan, back to going there, is a combination of moderate members of the communities and society, like Lisa was mentioning, the NGOs are one of the most active groups, but there is always this critique of, of course, the civil society is donor-driven and it's funded by external donors. So with the evacuation of all donors and embassies, the civil society will diminish. As a matter of fact, I'm sure all of you are well aware, those who follow Afghanistan, that no, actually, very, very tiny percentage of the Afghan civil society is out of country. And probably another tiny percentage who are not out of the country are desiring or willing to leave because they may feel that they have no place in the country. But the absolute majority, particularly in the provincial level and the subnational level, are there, active and dedicated to their work. The last stop, as I usually say, for Afghan civil society is not to gain the government. They are not the government opposition. They are challenging the governments and the ruling forces, whether they are donors, government, or other forces, opposition to government. They are challenging all for accountability, for transparency, for ensuring that better services reaches the people. So in the Afghan context, these are social associations. We call them Shura Ijtimai, or social associations. They are cultural associations. They are groups of community that are specifically coming around in terms of their professions, like doctors, engineers, lawyers. They all have their associations. There is also a very historically interesting, but also a very strong religious civil society, which is the Shura Ulama. Of course, every government tries to sort of bring them under the control and so forth, but there are plenty of examples, and the research shows that there are plenty of examples about the religious civil society being quite active and vibrant as well. And these are things that people should make note, that different segments of civil society have been there, have been around, have been vibrant members of their society trying to monitor the situation, influence the decision making, and also sort of protect or gain the values of that matter to the people of Afghanistan, regardless or away from the politics of it. Now, switching back to the issue or question of migration, as you very rightly mentioned, Simona, the case study of Afghanistan in the broader studies around migration is a very interesting one, because regardless of the scale of violence throughout the past 40 years, the 20 years included and 20 years before, the migration has always been two ways. And in some instances, the post-2001 context, particularly since the 2000, I think since 2016, if I'm not wrong, some numbers, some shocking numbers of returnees is comparable with the Second World War situation of migration and returnees that are not even experienced back then when people were coming out of their countries and trying to come back in massive numbers, particularly from the neighboring countries. As we speak, the numbers for, like you mentioned, part of them, I want to sort of bring some highlights to it. Between January and August 2021, just to give sort of your audience some numbers, we have a number of internally displaced people in terms of, within the country. IDPs or internally displaced are those who move due to conflict from one point to another within the country. Until August, it was 634,000 approximately of people. And of these internally displaced, the biggest majority are women and children. At the same time, we all are well aware of the intensity of conflict between January and August this year. And despite that, we've had a significant number of returnees from Iran, for example. And we all understand what is the reason for that. There was a COVID situation, further restrictions on the Afghan refugees in Iran, and also the destitute economic situation in Iran that did not really support the Afghans to stay there. We have quite a huge number of returnees from Iran until August, which is 797,000 returnees. And again, when it comes to women and children, in total, there is like 53% of the most returnees are women and children. And similarly, Pakistan also had much less than usual years, than earlier years, but still from Pakistan also we've had returnees. And now this whole numbers and these whole movements have taken a very dramatic shape in the post-August 15 context, when we saw that there is a full regime change, and that definitely drastically changed the number of migration to 3.8 million, as it's estimated by some sources now, in terms of the number of people who are migrating from Afghanistan in total leaving. And that's we are talking about a very different context now. Most of the Afghan borders from Central Asia to south and east with Pakistan to west with Iran are hugely restricted to the level that there were examples of people in massive numbers running away from homes, and they were pushed back by force, by shootings and sort of threats from the border police, for example, in the case of Nimruz. When Nimruz province was falling, the people were caught up and they had no choice but to forcefully be back to their communities. At least the good news is that there wasn't much fighting, and the people actually made it back to their homes one way or another. So this whole situation requires a very sort of careful look in terms of, what are the services available for people when they return. We are talking about a very huge number of returnees. In the past, at least 15 to 16 years, the number of returnees has always, actually, we can say even the whole of the 20 years, the number of returnees to Afghanistan has always been quite significant. The services were nearly non-existent or very weak. I mean, the services were blown up by having refugee townships, which was full of corruption. Everyone knows there is enough reports about it to, not paying attention to the actual needs. Sometimes we had highly educated returnees from Iran or from Pakistan in need of language courses. For example, the Iran returnees of Afghans needed language courses to be aware of the one of the two official languages in order to be able to work in some communities. That was not, given any priority. Or vice versa. For example, those who returned from Pakistan, they needed to have good, Dari speaking classes in order to, but they were everyone was satisfied in terms of, paying some cash, giving them some food and oil and, flour when they arrive, and maybe a few blankets to protect them. And that was more seen as a materialistic way. My organization, ARU, has done some research in this part in terms of, dignity in this displacement, which is highlighting, the dignity aspect of migration. So that in general covers the overall migration crisis and migration situation in the country. Now, what we are seeing, the new phenomena are emerging in terms of, the evacuations and the sort of the humanitarian crisis around that. I mean, if we go into the details of how, what a big failure this whole evacuation process by our respected international partners has been, that probably requires a whole other setting. But here I would like to sort of emphasize on the point that, in my opinion, any Afghan who decides and chooses to leave should have the full right to leave. Luckily, the authorities now are not taking a very strong stand against people who leave. They say always that we respect this personal choice if people want to leave. They are trying to encourage people to stay, and I think that's a very positive thing. But of course, any person that is encouraged to stay, it cannot be done by empty words. It has to be accompanied by giving the assurances, the security, the safety, that people do not feel that they will be targeted, prosecuted, or being put at risk. And there are, I personally know thousands of people who have been very active, not necessarily in politics, but in society, and they are not desiring to leave Afghanistan, as long as they are given that security. And now what we are seeing with the banking crisis and the whole situation that is probably into the hand of the international community and not in a very complicated way, is that we will have a massive move of migrations in the case or scenario that the poverty rises and people with salaries, people with jobs will add to the number or the queues of those who have already been deeply poor. Let's also not forget that the COVID crisis have also affected many medium and small enterprises way before this conflict reached to this point where we are. So this whole world is recovering from the COVID crisis. Afghanistan is also part of the world. But when it comes to the crisis ahead of us, I think there is a very urgent step to be taken. And that urgent step means that we should not definitely repeat the mistake that happens probably to other contexts or within the Afghanistan before, in terms of, equalizing legitimacy, equalizing formal recognition of a regime with, engaging with them. These are not two same things. I personally do not sort of advertise for formal recognition or all that, but I would like to make it very clear through this platform to the G20 members that they should not make the Afghan people pay yet again for the prices of the mistakes that they themselves have been making and have been playing a great role in it, or they had contributed to it. So the Afghan people should not be punished for that. And for that reason, taking immediate actions, at least starting with those who are providing humanitarian assistance, those who are providing services through, work in the government offices. Let me be very frank, and I'm sure Lisa will also agree with me as someone who is in Kabul now and seeing that majority of the government offices are not occupied fully by the Taliban. Only the top leaderships are, but the rest of the employees are the same Afghan government officials as before. I don't want to see them punished just because there is not a formal recognition for all of that. And I'm just saying that in a very obviously personal capacity. So the prevention of further humanitarian crisis, the prevention of further deeper poverty is in the hands of the international community. And I think there has to be a very responsible steps towards ensuring that will happen. And of course, having said that, we cannot sort of ignore the fact that from the Taliban side also there has to be some very serious actions. They have to prove first and foremost to the people of Afghanistan that they are not the fighters anymore. They are the governors, and that needs to be immediately proved to people by opening the schools, for example, from secondary to higher up towards the girls. And we see excellent civil society activism on the ground as we speak, showing the messages from elderly Afghans, from male across the most traditional parts of Afghan society. And there are, initiatives going around that shows that the people of Afghanistan, the men in Afghanistan, let alone the women and girls themselves, are in demand of their daughters to go to school. This is our religious obligation. It's not a choice. It's an obligation based on Islam. So they should not deprive Afghan girls from their education. They should not deprive Afghan women from their jobs, because let's face it, we were talking about migration and refugee situation. If over 59% of the internally displaced people are children, if over 21% of the internally displaced persons are women, so that makes nearly 80% of the IDPs becoming women and children. How, without aid workers who are women, you can ensure that those who are in actual needs will receive them? I need to see the answer from the Taliban and from those who are in power to this question. So there is that urgency. My hope and desire is that we keep a constructive engagement with them in order to continue and ensure that people will not suffer in the same way we have suffered until the day before the fall of Kabul, the fall of Afghanistan to the hand of the new regime. So I will end it here and will be happy to answer any questions as we move ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your great and passionate intervention. And we had two other interventions, but unfortunately, Afghan Women Network was not able to connect themselves. And it's a kind of symbolic mess, you know. We know how much is difficult now for women in Afghanistan to live, how much is difficult to deal with a daily life and their daily risk. We receive lot of news about this, and we are really worried about the situation. And I would like just to say what one of my colleagues from Afghanistan was telling us, you know, we don't need just food, water, where to sleep, and just oxygen. We need education, we need rights, we need freedom, we need peace. And this is, I think, one of the strongest message I received from the youth of Afghanistan, that in the last 20 years, we're just look at the education like the only light to follow in their life. And really, sometimes it's quite incredible, like education is really one of the most important values on how to build their future. If I'm just thinking our Western society, where education sometimes have lost the importance, that for others it's really the bottom of their future life. I would like to know if there are some questions, and we have 10 minutes more for question and answer. I don't know if someone want to just have some question. Okay, so Riccardo Moro, would you like to add something after this intense moment?
No, I don't have anything to add, but that the commitment of civil society will continue. We'll continue with all the different actors that already are active in this moment, and we'll continue in at least as a civil society in insisting in underline that human rights are the ethic compass that we have to shape our policies and in our political dialogue with governments and institutions in founding our position and our cause.
So thank you very much. Thanks for everybody to be here today with us. Of course, we will follow the evolution of what's going on in Afghanistan, and we will not leave alone Afghanistan, not only as Pangea, but I know as civil society, worldwide civil society. And thanks to Lisa Piper and from Akbar Thanks to Orzalan and Matt. Thanks to Riccardo Moro, and I hope to see you